and welcome to the Love of the Star podcast with myself, Eric Chiafalo, and the Super Bowl winning scout, Brian Broaddus. We are live in New Orleans, continuing the Super Bowl coverage here on Friday. We're going to hop on a bird and get back to the DFW coming up later on this evening, but one more day for Super Bowl Radio Row. The stars were out last night, Broaddus. It was a who's who with the NFL honors going on, and basically every big name person in the NFL being here in New Orleans to take it all in, including Jerry himself. And he was doing some talking. Hey, Micah Parsons on Radio Row doing some talking. We saw our buddy Zach Martin, Brandon Aubrey earlier in the week. Even Des Bryant made it out to Radio Row throwing up the X. So plenty of Cowboys conversation going on. We had a great conversation with Emmitt Smith on our weekday show as well in the G-Bag Nation on the Cowboys flagship 105.3 The Fan. So we can get into some of what Emmitt was sharing with us. But I do want to start, before we get to Jerry and everybody, I just want to acknowledge how awful it is that the Hall of Fame once again does not get our buddy Darren Woodson in. Broaddus, your favorite football player that you ever watched or played or coached with, anything like that.
Yeah.
So that was sad.
Yeah, it really was, Eric. And, you know, I remember being in Las Vegas last year, then the year before in Phoenix, and having to navigate that. It became very personal to me. As you mentioned, Darren Woodson, one of my favorite players I've ever been with. And I've been very fortunate to deal with Brett Favre and Reggie White and, Jimmy Smith from the Jacksonville Jaguars, Tony Boselli, great players, pillars of the National Football League. And Darren Woodson, to me, is one of those pillars of the National Football League. And, I just remember being in those airports and, flying home with Woody and, his wife, and he seemed to always take it better than me, the news. And, I always hated it for him. And, I reached out yesterday during our show on the G-Bag Nation to a Hall of Fame voter, and he didn't paint a very good picture for it. And, and I was worried. He says, hey, there are upsets. There are some upsets. You just never know the upsets. And, and I was like, I took that as Darren Woodson wasn't going to go into the Hall of Fame. And, so you talk about upsets. Oh, here I am, once again, upset. I've had the experience in my life of being with safeties who are in the Hall of Fame and then safeties who we competed against. Darren Woodson was one of those guys I competed against the first, 5-6 years of my NFL life, and then later to be on the same team with him. And he's an even better person and player. Unfortunately, the end of his career, we messed things up so badly. Here's a Hall of Fame worthy warrior of a player, Super Bowl champ in his own right, one of the guys that kind of, if you look at how safety play is, when you draw up the perfect safety, Darren Woodson's that guy. And, we really messed up the end of his career just because of the stupidity that we had, with the way the roster was built, some of the decisions we made. Unfortunately, he had to endure some bad seasons when he shouldn't have had. He should have been going out on the top of his game, and he wasn't. And I felt terrible about that. But I was with Leroy Butler, who is currently in the Hall of Fame with the Green Bay Packers. Leroy Butler's a fine player. I've said this before. He's not Darren Woodson. He's not. Even though Leroy Butler was a guy that played outside corner and then, kind of became, he kind of got into the point where he couldn't cover as well, moved to safety, and he played fine as a safety. Not Darren Woodson. Not the ability to cover, to walk out, consistently play in the slot, play as a down linebacker in certain packages, defend the run, cover tight ends, cover backs, cover receivers, be around the ball. You can't tell me in the great history of the National Football League, and the Dallas Cowboys they've only been around since 1960. They're not like the New York Giants who've been around since 1925, or that kind of, or the Packers way before that. the Cowboys been around since 1960, but if you look at the history of the Dallas Cowboys, it's tremendous. It's a tremendous history of winning football, successful Super Bowl champs. And Darren Woodson's your all-time leading tackler. And you can't get him in the Hall of Fame on that. Just that alone, should tell you all you need to know about Darren Woodson. And here we are again, and now it's probably going to come down to some seniors votes, but you've got guys and gals in that room on the seniors committee that really know these guys and dig in on these guys. And I want to believe with all my heart that how Bob Hayes and Rayfield Wright and others got in, Chuck Howley got in the Hall of Fame. I want to believe the same path will be there for Darren Woodson. But right now it's just, once again, it's 365 days pass, and it once again, it's disappointment for me. But Darren Woodson has always taken that disappointment a lot better than I ever have. And when I see him and I start to complain and rant, he looks at me and goes, "Bryan, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay." And that's just the type of person that Darren Woodson is. Hey, it's going to be okay. Don't lose your damn mind over this. And, but he, one of the most deserving players I'll ever, I told you he's the top guy. You mentioned he's the top guy I've ever been with. And I could rattle off some great players, but he is the number one guy that I've ever had the chance to compete against or be on the same team with.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well said. I know that it's a huge bummer for all of us, and he sat down with us on Radio Row earlier this week, and just as joyful as ever. And but it means a lot to him. It means a lot. This is the ultimate individual honor for a guy that reached the pinnacle multiple times as a Super Bowl champion. This is really the only box left to check. And he talks about his son and how his son wants him to get in so bad, and his mom, and how you hear about it from everybody. And it's not even just about you and the individual honor that it is for you, but it's also an honor for all the individuals around you that have supported you throughout your entire life. And it means a lot to them as well. So I know this is definitely something that is a huge bummer for him and his family, but you mentioned it, the positivity. I mean, he's such a great dude. I mean, if you ever are fortunate enough to spend a few minutes around Darren Woodson, man, I mean, that guy he lights up a room with his energy and his positivity and treating everybody the same. I mean, he's just a 10 out of 10 human being. We know what type of football player he was, certainly Hall of Fame caliber. And I guess now you mentioned the senior stuff. That's something that he's now going to have to, like Drew Pearson style. This is going to be.
Here we go. Yeah. It's, you're involved for so many years just on the regular committee, but there is a seniors committee. Rick Goslin, he used to write for the Dallas Morning News, but he does stuff with with Hall of Fame, with their podcasts and things like that. Rick has done a great job of making sure that players from the era where I grew up, when I grew up in the 70s watching guys play, and I mentioned the Harvey Martins, who was not in the Hall of Fame, but the Bob Hayeses, the Rayfield Wrights, Chuck Howleys, those guys that I watched play as a youth, he's made sure that they've got the recognition that they rightfully deserve. And Rick has done a tremendous job. And, people always really went after Rick Rick is one of the best draft guys there. And when you talk about reporting on the NFL draft connections, a lot of people had problems with Rick Goslin because of, some of the draft grades and talking about players and this, that, and the other. But you should, if you're a Cowboy fan, you should honestly be cheering Rick Goslin, because he is the one guy that is highly respected in that room, that stands up there and gives the speeches for these guys, for the Jimmy Johnsons and the I mentioned the Bob Hayeses and the Rayfield Wrights and the Drew Pearsons and guys like that. He is the guy from actually Detroit, Michigan. No Cowboy, loyalty there. He just covered the players that I mentioned, and so he understands their importance to the game. So it's up to Rick Gosselin and some others, but they do a really good job of not only, identifying the Dallas Cowboys that have wrongly been left out, but other NFL teams as well. The Minnesota Vikings, the Atlanta Falcons. I know there's players been on their teams. Those are, maybe not Atlanta with great teams, but some of their players, Claude Humphrey was one of the best edge rushers you'll ever see, played on a really bad teams, but very deserving of being in the Hall of Fame. And Rick has been a guy that's championed the guy who has been wrongfully left out by the regular voting community there at the Hall of Fame.
Well, now eligible for next year is going to be Jason Witten.
Yeah.
Do you expect him to be a first ballot guy?
Well, you got to look back and see, when you talk about the landscape of, and start out with Eric, very fortunate that was on the staff that drafted Jason Witten. We had a first round grade on him in 2003. The grade of a 119, just to give you a little pull back the curtain bit, had him in the bottom of the first round on our board. And it was a really interesting draft that year when it came to the number of tight ends in the draft. L.J. Smith was involved with that. Dallas Clark was in that draft. I mean, there was some really good tight ends in that draft. And Witten, it just so happened that several of those tight ends went well before Witten did. And we were going to take him there in the second round. And it was just a blinking light. And we ended up taking, another player. And we got to the third round, and Jerry Jones looked at Bill Parcells and says, "We got to take Witten now, right?" He's like, "Yeah, we got to take Witten now." So we did. And, Bill had a vision for the player. Jason was extremely young, a young player coming out of Tennessee. And, it had a really rough background when you talk about the off the field stuff, but he came to the Cowboys and just immediately, was battled through things, showed toughness, just outstanding in the way that he was able to play. So, that's kind of where his career started. But you look at longevity, you look at catches, you look at touchdowns, you look at yards, just the overall complete player. I would think that he has a very, very good chance of getting into the Hall of Fame right off that first ballot, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope they don't do the DeMarcus Ware thing to him, where they make him sit out the first round and then you get in on the second ballot. There are some guys that surefire type first ballot Hall of Famer dudes. DeMarcus Ware was that. He ends up going on the second ballot. Hopefully they don't do that to our guy Jason Witten. I do want to close it down by just acknowledging Eli Manning, New York Giants quarterback, not getting in on his first opportunity to be a Hall of Famer. So he will not be a first ballot guy either. I think that's fair. I lean on the side of, hey, you rose to the occasion on 2 postseason runs that culminated in Super Bowl championships. You made big time throws in those Super Bowl. I mean, he was the MVP of those Super Bowl wins. Eli Manning was versus the Patriots. You stopped the undefeated season of the Patriots in 2007, and then you come back a few years later and beat Bill and Brady again. I think Eli Manning, despite the regular season average production, win losses and everything else, I think what he did ultimately is going to be enough to get him in. But I am glad that it was not first ballot stuff. First ballot, that's a different level of dude. And Eli Manning, I think at some point you deserve it. I don't know if it's second, third, fourth. I don't care if he has to wait 10 years. But at some point, I would be fine with him getting in. But I am glad he was not a first ballot guy. I don't think he deserved that.
What I think that I've been very fortunate as you have as well, Eric. I mean, you're a lot younger guy than me, but just we've seen him play. We understand where his game's at. I personally, I don't think he's a Hall of Fame quarterback. I just don't. Now the Super Bowls, I know Zach Wolchuk, our radio partner, argued, well, it's the 2 Super Bowls. The 2 Super Bowls should get him in and all that. If you look at his numbers, career numbers, he's a 500 quarterback. When you look at the records, look at the turnovers, look at the touchdowns, look at, there's a lot to be, to digest there as a player. There's some very, very good with Eli Manning, but there's a lot of very mediocre or even poor by quarterback standards. And the fact that he, was on a Giants team, went on a magical run, defense playing out of their mind. Tom Brady, you knew immediately in that game. When Tom Brady, you look at him, Patriots wearing white that day. Tom Brady's got grass stains on the back of his jersey. You're thinking, well, this is going to be a tough day for New England because the Giants defense has come to play today. And I think that he has benefited from some very, very good teams. So yeah, it's not surprising to me. And if you're one of those fans that are watching our show, just because maybe you were going to thinking Eric and I might talk about some draft or something like that, and you're a Giants fan, I'm sorry. I'm sure you could say the same thing about some of the Cowboy players. Maybe you're saying the same thing about Darren Woodson, but to me, it's not a bias against the Giants or anything like that. It's just that, there's quarterbacks in the Hall of Fame whose numbers are pretty pedestrian. So, that's kind of where we're at right now.
All right, this is the Love of the Star podcast, and the Love of the Star podcast is an Odyssey podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Now, Broadus, let's get into some of the stuff that was talked about. Jerry Jones, Micah Parsons, Emmitt Smith on Radio Row. Plenty of conversations being had about the Dallas Cowboys and Jerry Jones during the NFL Honors red carpet. He was getting on the mic and he was talking about how the Cowboys are in sort of they're a win now team. Brian Schottenheimer was a win now move. He paid the quarterback more than anybody's ever paid a player in NFL history in Dak Prescott before the season started, and he said that's a win now move. So that's the picture that Jerry's painting right now about the Cowboys. This is not a rebuild situation, and at least not in his mind. And that's the interesting part of where the Cowboys are right now, because they're telling you with some of the decisions they've made, paying Dak, paying CeeDee Lamb. We'll see what happens with the Micah stuff. We know it's going to end up with him getting paid. We'll just see how long they drag it out before they do it. But when you're paying guys like that at the quarterback position, at the wide receiver position, you've paid a guy like Trayvon Diggs at the cornerback spot, you are telling people that we believe in our quarterback. We believe in paying a bunch of dudes to be hopefully some of the best at their position, and we're trying to go win right now, despite the fact that they have a bunch of holes on the roster. So they have this issue where they have a ridiculous amount of needs, but they've paid the most important position, and they got a super high paid wide receiver and corner. So they're in this weird position where you kind of look at it, go, now this should be a rebuilding team based on the amount of holes they have, but they've paid the quarterback and Lamb and Diggs, and they're kind of telling you they're trying to win right now with these guys. So it's kind of a weird area that they're in right now.
Yeah, it really is. And matter of fact, it's funny. I was looking down at my phone. It looks like the Cowboys have hired an offensive line coach. If I could, Nick Harris. It just went across here, and the Cowboys are. If I just break a little news here from Nick Harris, Cowboys are expected to hire Kansas State offensive coordinator and offensive line coach Connor Riley. He's from Kansas State as their O-line coach, and this is per Bruce Feldman from the college football area. So there was some talk about were they going to have two offensive line coaches? It looks like that's in fact that they're going to do that. So here they are. They did make a hire again. It looks like that Connor Riley, who was the offensive line, he's going to be the offensive line coach for the Cowboys. He does reunite with Cooper Beebe as well. So that's that'll be good. So we'll see exactly how things kind of shake out. With the staff. Now you have with the offensive coordinator, and then also now with the with Adams, and then also now with Connor Riley from Kansas State. How will they divide up? Maybe you'll have an interiors coach and then a tackles coach, and that way they can work together with this. But I'm looking forward to kind of digging in with my guys in college and seeing what Connor Riley's all about. I'm sorry I didn't mean to jump in, but the thing about you asked about Jerry, the thing with Jerry is that he's in a mode right now. I don't think his roster's particularly good, and I think he is putting a lot of pressure on. I think he's putting a lot of pressure on his scouting staff. I think he's putting a lot of pressure on his coaches. He's made moves. He talks about paying Dak, paying CD, and things like that. There's a chance, Eric, and I know people don't want to hear this, but I'm just going to be real about it. There's a chance his team's not as good as it was this year. If you look at, they're about to lose a lot of depth, and he starts to talk about, that maybe things will be like it has been last year. Maybe they're going to look at signing Micah Parsons, and then that's kind of all they're going to do. I personally, if that's the case, I was very hopeful that things would change in free agency. It still might, but Jerry's putting a lot of pressure on Schottenheimer, and there's a good possibility that this team won't be as good. We'll see. We'll see how it plays out, but I have my doubts. I think they're going to lose a tremendous amount of depth with some of these players. I was kind of on board if you don't want to re-sign him and want to go out and see if you can find somebody from the Buccaneers, the Rams, 49ers, I'd be all for that. Maybe something different, maybe a different approach. But it sounds like to me that it's going to be Micah Parsons or bust. And, then you're going to probably have to bottom fish. You're going to have to draft. You're going to have to go with the college free agents. And then you got a whole new coaching staff, which I'm okay with the new coaching staff. But, I think Jerry Jones might be a little bit unrealistic what he envisions his team being going forward as you and I do this podcast on this Friday.
Yeah, which is pretty par for the course. Jerry's always selling. He's always trying to spin it for the positive. And so he's always going to sort of take that approach. But if you're being realistic about it, and especially with the way that they go about their business when it comes to player acquisition and really only giving themselves the opportunity in the draft to bring in great talent. And we know when it comes to the draft, it's such a crapshoot that you can only really depend on it so much. And it's really the best foundation to have for your team. But playing in free agency, playing in the trade waters, I think they're going to have to do all of that if they want to be able to fill all the holes that they have. A draft class is not going to be able to do that. And you mentioned, with the new coaching staff, we saw how much of an adjustment it was to bring Zimmer in and how long it took for the defense to get going. Now you're obviously bringing in a Matt Eberflus. The offense will have some continuity, but I think Clayton Adams is coming in to shake some things up there, which is certainly for the positive. It's great that we just had this news break while we're recording now of the new offensive line coach coming out of college, a place that Clayton Adams has himself spent many years at different college programs before getting into the NFL over the last 5 years or so for him. So, and I love this guy that they just hired, Connor Riley. Man, he took Cooper Beebe as a defensive lineman and said, nah, you're going to be an offensive lineman, and I'm going to make you a guy that's going to go end up being the starting center for the Dallas Cowboys. That's the type of guy that you're getting in Connor Riley. And he's won championships, North Dakota State University. Yeah. So you're bringing in a winner, and you're bringing in a guy who, when he's taken Cooper Beebe as a defensive lineman at K-State and turned him into an NFL caliber offensive lineman. So that's certainly encouraging. But all this new stuff and again, all the holes that they have, it is going to be tough to, and the question of Dak. The question about Dak right now is real, coming off the injury. What version of him are you getting? But he's certainly going to have a little pep in his step because he's got his guy Schottenheimer, and it seems like this was definitely a move that was to appease Dak. So hopefully him and Schottenheimer, Clayton Adams being on the same page and and dialing up an offense that is most comfortable for Dak and playing to his strengths and whatnot. I do think the rushing attack is going to be strong. And we had our guy Emmitt Smith on Radio Row talking about Ashton Genty and whatnot, and he admires him as a talent, but he's not even sure that the Cowboys are ready for a talent like that. How much more do they need to do to the roster, the offensive line, to be able to actually welcome in a guy like Ashton Genty and he can have the greatest possible impact? Because Emmitt Smith was fired up with us, man. Him and the classic 90s superstar Cowboy players are fed up with the way this thing is going right now.
They absolutely are. And, even Emmett brought it up, he's living on the foundation of Jerry is living on the foundation of stuff that they did 30 years ago. Emmett even brought that up, and I've never heard one of those legendary Cowboy players say that. But, I think Emmett, he came in with a lot of opinions, good opinions, maybe fueled a little bit by that tequila that he drinks. Herradura, man, good stuff. Actually, it tasted. I mean, I know you tried some. I tried some. My gosh, that was smooth. And I'm not a big tequila drinker, but anyway, he came in. He was spitting fire. He made you think about the Cowboys. I think that the question I would ask him is, or not the question, maybe the comment I would make back to him is, yeah, we don't know what Brian Schottenheimer is going to do scheme-wise. I do like the thought about trying to run the ball. Now, the thing is that they've got to find a way to protect Dak Prescott, because Dak Prescott, the one thing that McCarthy and Jerry Jones agreed on leaving the building was that Dak's mobility is now not as good as it once was. And they're going to have to find ways to work around that. Well, how do you help that? You run the ball, you do things, you play a different style of game. And so if, we've heard a lot of lip service from McCarthy in the past about running the ball, need to run the ball, need to be better, need to be more physical. And, he held the play sheet and he just didn't do it until, halfway through the season when Dak was already out of the mix. So I think that Brian Schottenheimer wants to run the football. I think the fact that he's gone out and got a coordinator who is very proficient in running the football. You hire another offensive line coach that was a coordinator, like at Kansas State, a very physical team. The way that they run the ball, even with Deuce Vaughn, they kind of beat you up front, and we're very much a team built to handle the rigors of running the football. So I think there's going to be a different attitude with this offense. And so I would challenge Emmitt Smith in a way of saying, let's see, indications are that they're going to want to run the ball if you look at the hires. But it's going to be about the schemes. It is going to be about, how you're going to go about and do that. And like I say, just by the hires, I would say that they're going to make running a priority for this team, and having a guy potentially like Ashton Genty or any other of the top backs, I think is what's going to need to happen here for sure.
Yeah, and we'll get to talking about the draft here in just a few minutes. I did want to acknowledge Micah Parsons talking about, hey, Jerry, if we're in win now mode, if we're trying to hit the ground running with Schottenheimer, Micah Parsons, like, first of all, let's not drag our feet on this next deal. He's obviously trying to get paid, but he says, I don't think we can afford to keep having things wait out. So he's trying to urge the Cowboys to get his extension done in a timely manner. But he also said, when asked about it, would you take less money, Micah, in order to be able to trade for a guy like Myles Garrett, who's on the market? I know you and Walchuk were talking about Myles Garrett the other day. Probably a very, very far-fetched situation to bring the local Arlington legend back to his hometown. But I mean, that would be a swing for the fences kind of move if you're Jerry Jones saying, hey, we are in win now mode. I mean, Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons, and Micah saying, I'm willing. I don't know how Micah's agent feels about Micah saying these things, willing to take less money, but But Micah, I think, man, he at some point he's going to become jaded like the rest of us, where you have all these hopes and you have all these desires for, hey, we can make this team better. We can make this team better. But if the Cowboys just say status quo, it won't be long before Micah just sort of throws in the towel on the idea that this thing can get awesome, because he has this hope, and it feels like he's still naive to the way this team actually conducts itself.
Yeah, then he all of a sudden then he becomes like our guy in Cleveland. He's now demanding a trade. All of a sudden it's like and he's got hope. He's got hope. They've killed Myles Garrett's hope in Cleveland. They've killed it, and you just wonder if there's going to be a point in time where they're going to kill Micah Parsons' hope here, and then he becomes Myles Garrett, and now. 3 years, 4 years later, he's like, listen, I need to be out of here. I can't, you're wasting my years right now. So, I asked Zach Wolchuk and I asked you guys, if there's somebody on your board that's better than Myles Garrett at 12, then we probably need to take that guy. If there's not, then, you need to think about maybe making a trade here, but it's going to cost you. It's probably going to cost you, we'll see if it costs you the 1, a 3, and something else. We'll see. I mean, these trades are sometimes you get great value for them, and as Dallas Maverick fans know, and the guys that cover the Mavs, sometimes you don't get the full value of what your trade really, really is. So it's just depending on how you navigate that, and I wouldn't be surprised. Like I said, I personally feel like a team like the Commanders are going to I think the Commanders are going to take an approach. If that the Commanders general manager was in San Francisco. San Francisco is a very aggressive front office. I could see him now kind of building on the momentum of they got the right quarterback. They got Terry McLaurin. They need some help on their defense, especially in the secondary. But you bring Myles Garrett to the Commanders, and with Dan Quinn and the way that he used Micah Parsons, geez, that's going to be a real problem for everybody in the NFC. And then, if they get on and get to go to the Super Bowl. So I would keep an eye on the Commanders with the cap space and the willingness of a general manager to play a very aggressive game. I think Howie Roseman at Philadelphia has put everybody on alert how you need to operate in order to get your team to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, 100%. He's put on an absolute masterclass.
Eric, I think you paused your mic. You might want to check it. I think your finger hit the button. Is it pink?
Yes.
Am I back? You're back. Yeah. When your hand went over the top, you got to watch touching that thing.
Rookie mistake.
Rookie mistake with the good mics though. But when you touch that green thing, it makes it pink, and all of a sudden now you're not talking very well. But go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you.
You're making a point. Yeah.
No, I just was saying I wouldn't put it past Howie Roseman, who's been putting on an absolute team building masterclass over some years now, to try and get Myles Garrett in an Eagles uniform and step ahead of the Commanders. But the Commanders are definitely a team to watch when it comes to Myles Garrett. It's a no-brainer for them with where they're at. Having a quarterback on the rookie deal and it going all in around him is a no-brainer, especially for a team whose defense was really the Achilles heel of their team last year.
Absolutely,
so, Detroit, Buffalo, even Kansas City. I mean, you name that team, and they should be in. They should be in on Myles Garrett.
Absolutely.
Okay, you're listening to the Love of the Star podcast. The Love of the Star podcast is an Odyssey podcast, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. I have somebody knocking on my hotel door right now.
I think you're probably got room service working. Not room service, but you're probably got housekeeping involved.
Yeah,
we got wrap this. You want to wrap this thing up then? Real quick.
Well, let's get a couple of Bryan Broaddus draft takes going on in here. What did we find out about your Ohio State left tackle that you would love to see in a Cowboys uniform, but he's got a knee issue, and there were some questions about it.
Yeah, and another rookie mistake is to put your "Do Not Disturb" sign on your door. That's another thing you got to learn about. But there, when you're doing on these hotel podcasts, you got to protect yourself. It's all cool. Josh Simmons, the tackle, very talented tackle, number one tackle on my board. We never really knew what his knee injury was going into this draft season. We didn't have an idea. I was told it was a patella tendon injury. So it's not the ACL, not the PCL, not the MCL or anything like that. It's the tendon that really holds the knee together, I believe is how it's described to me. And so, yeah, and it was a pretty significant one. And so there's a possibility that this kid might not be ready till August. We will see how that all kind of transpired. We have the combine at the end of the month. The doctors will have a chance to pull on all these kids. And then you'll probably get an idea of really the severity of or how the rehab is coming along. But yeah, it is a patella tendon injury and something that we all were kind of waiting to see. We had not heard what the severity of the injury was or what the injury was, but did learn it was the patella.
Okay, so let's say that the Cowboys in round one they don't go for the offensive lineman. Maybe they feel better about Terrence Steele continuing to progress on the right side, and maybe they feel like bringing in Clayton Adams, a new scheme and new offensive line coach. How much better can that make a guy like Tyler Guyton, of course, and Cooper Beebe, hopefully taking some next steps? You feel great about Tyler Smith. When it comes to potentially replacing Zach Martin at right guard, you obviously have some in-house candidates. You have the Basses, you have the Hoffmans, but where does it stretch in the draft? Do you have guys that you can get on maybe day 2, day 3 that could be a sort of a plug-and-play guy at right guard?
Yeah, absolutely. And, even if you want to, I know there were people talking about potentially if you wanted to draft, say, me personally, Banks, the tackle from Texas. I think he's a guard. I know there's some people that they're kind of debate that. I just look at his skill set, and that's kind of where I think he probably better fits. The more you watch him, you can watch him in these playoff games, and, there was some good, there was some bad. There's some talk about Will Campbell from LSU. If you wanted to say draft him at 12, you could maybe move him to guard. But yeah, I think that you look at, the top just true guard is Booker from Alabama. Massive guy, big, powerful, type of a player. Jackson from Ohio State is a guard that had to shift out to tackle to make up for Simmons. Here they win the national championship. Really good player there. Probably a second-round guy right behind Booker. Milam from West Virginia. He wasn't as good in the Senior Bowl as he was at West Virginia. Kind of a guy. Zabel from North Dakota State. Kid that, you look at the school, you say North Dakota State. They play great football there. They win the national championship every year. You can watch them play Colorado to open the season. You can watch this kid Zabel go to the Senior Bowl and have really a good success there. So there are some guards in that second, third round tier that if you don't take one, Banks would have to be, Campbell and Banks would have to be guys that you probably have to take at 12. But everybody else kind of fits into that 44 and on back area on my board.
Okay. Well, that's great news because I understand with the amount of holes that they have, and I do think that there's some optimism with bringing in some of these new guys on the offensive staff that I think can help. That can help expedite the growth in a Guyton and a BB and maybe get the most out of all these guys on the offensive line in a way that maybe Mike Solari and Mike McCarthy were unable to do. So hopefully just with the coaching and the schematic changes, that levels up your offensive line in a different way. And then obviously with this class being as dominant of a running back class as it is, they're going to get a guy. They're going to get a guy back there with some fresh legs. We'll see what happens with Rico Dowdle, but I'm optimistic that this rushing attack is going to be something that we're all pleased with, at least as the season gets going, and hopefully it's something that can sustain itself, and then we'll see where they go elsewhere when it comes to some of the wide receiver stuff. I know a lot of people are putting wide receiver in round one for the Cowboys. I still think, for me personally, Broadus, and I know you have to have a dance partner, but I think the best case scenario, other than one of your top 2 or 3 players on your board falling to you at 12, is Can you find somebody that's interested in a move up? And can the Cowboy? And I think even Emmitt Smith was playing this with us on Radio Row this week as well. He's like, man, the Cowboys, if you can trade down a little bit in round one and pick up some stuff, draft asset wise, that would be the no-brainer, best possible thing. But you never really know when it comes to trades. I mean, you can try and get ahead of it, right, if you're a team, but for the most part, you never know that a trade's going to fall into your lap until you're on the clock and it's happening.
Yeah, that's you always have to be ready to go up or go back in a draft. You also have to be ready to sit there and make a pick. And you're right, it takes two to make that dance work. Before the draft, the day of, you throw a lot of chum in the water and say, listen, if you're interested in coming up, give us a call. We're open for business. If we might be interested in coming up, you call the teams ahead of you, talk about that. So you make everybody well known of what your intentions are. But it has to be the right player. You don't want to trade away from a great player or a guy that you feel like is going to be a difference maker. If you start to lose your guys, now that's a little bit of a different situation. That turns into a little bit of panic because you're like, listen, we're not comfortable picking anybody here, and then you bail. And we saw that happen. It worked out great for them when they took Travis Frederick. They bailed. I mean, they went down, huge. They lost out. They got a third round pick when they actually should have got a second round pick out of that. And they just bailed because they weren't comfortable with the players there. So you have to be ready to go up. You have to have a plan for how far back you want to go. But you also, more importantly, need to have somebody on that board because the minute you pick up that phone, and we learned this from the Dallas Mavericks, and you've said this on the radio a couple of different times, the minute you pick up that phone and start calling teams about trading back, you're losing leverage because you're trying to get the hell out of there. And, so you just the best thing that could happen for the Cowboys is there's a good run of players still on the board for them that they can navigate, or that somebody's calling up, like say someone's calling up, but they have to call to try and get out of there. They're probably going to lose leverage and probably going to lose the value in some of the picks that they get. So got to make sure all that's buttoned up before you even think about getting out of there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all about how you play your cards, and we've seen firsthand with the Mavericks and Nico Harrison.
Absolutely.
It can combust on you real quick right there. All right. Well, this has been great, man. Broadus, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And listeners, we really appreciate you. Please subscribe. We're all over the YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. It is Love of the Star, Bryan Broadus, and myself, Eric Chiafalo, Zach Wolchuk as well. And we'll be back post Super Bowl early next week for some more Cowboys conversation. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.